And we're back. It's another episode of Webcomics Confidential. Hello, everybody. My name is Brad Guigar, and we've got a couple of topics that we're going to talk about. The first one I'm going to carry over from an earlier vidcast where I talked about going full stop on comic conventions. Something that I got to tell you, I went to the Greater Philadelphia Expo on Friday last week. It was the first day of spring break, and I surprised my kids with tickets to the show. There was a Dragon Ball Z voice actor that my kids were really going to enjoy meeting. So I saw it was the first day of spring break. I surprised them with it. And I've got to tell you, I walked into that auditorium and saw people sitting behind their artist alley tables and manning their booths. And I was absolutely convinced that I made the right decision. I don't want to go back to that for anything. But we're going to talk about that in a moment. The question that was asked on webcomics.com, let me bring it up here. It says, there's something about being in a convention full of other artists that felt like a great goal to work towards, if anything, for the camaraderie and talk in or before the show, which, by the way, you can do without manning a booth. You can buy a ticket to the show much cheaper, a much less time sink, and do all the things that you mentioned. But the question is, are there any small press / webcomic focused shows still worth showing at? At which point I had to kind of I had to laugh. I when I read that, I roared out loud. And it wasn't at the question. The question's a fair question. I laughed at my reaction to that question because I realized I had gotten a little bit obsessed. Have you ever met somebody who just makes the switch to, let's say, veganism? This person becomes a newly minted vegan, is feeling great, has health benefits, but cannot shut up about being a vegan, and looks at you dolefully over Thanksgiving when you say you're looking forward to your turkey, because how could you imagine eating a turkey when veganism is so great? Being a vegan has all these benefits, food tastes better, and they can't shut up about it. And I realized in my visceral reaction to, well, could I still do some small shows, that I had become like that vegan friend who cannot shut up about veganism. In other words, I've made a choice for my business, and it was a real visceral moment. I'm using that word again. It was a like a mind-opening thing for me. Like, I don't have to do comic conventions anymore. And in fact, it's better for me if I don't. It took me a long time to get there. But once I made that break and walked into that expo center and just felt relief washing over me as I looked at those poor, and I know a couple of you guys are members. And I looked into your faces and I'm like, oh God, I'm glad it's not me. That doesn't mean that it's not for you. However, my response when I saw, could I still do some small shows? Maybe small shows are better. It felt a lot like that old joke that where the mom tells the kid to stop touching himself, and she says, "Don't do that, you'll go blind." And he says, "Well, what if I do it just until I have glasses?" That made me laugh in the same way. It's like my statement, and I devoted an entire Webcomics Confidential to the theme of no more comic conventions. And the first question I see is, well, what if I just go to small ones? What if I just do it till I need glasses? My attitude is full stop. But I don't want to be like that vegan friend of mine who can't shut up, especially around Thanksgiving. If you want to have turkey dinner, I'm not going to look dolefully at you this November. All I'm going to ask you is to do this. My decision, I know, is right for me. May not be right for you. Only you can decide if it's right for you. And this is what I'm asking you to do. Just do an honest accounting at the next convention you go to and answer the question for yourself. All right. And it might mean that you lose a little bit of money or you take it on the chin. But that's the only way you're really going to prove it to yourself is by going to a convention and taking an honest accounting of all of your costs. That includes travel costs, eating out costs, table costs, the cost of promotion, getting all those flyers printed up. If you're printing stuff specifically to go to the show, which by the way is a dumb idea, but if you're anything you're producing specifically for that show, that's a cost. Hotel, right on down the line. Keep track of all of your costs and then take an honest accounting of all of the money that you made during that time. And that's only two parts of the problem because that's very simple math. But you still have to factor in what you could have been doing that weekend. And a lot of these shows now are 3-day shows. The Wizard shows now, it's not unusual to have a 4-day show. If you factor in travel to and from the show, you can be out an entire week. All right? Factor in what you could have been doing during that time, that weekend or that 4-day span. What could you have been doing that might have made you more money? Could you have been revamping your Patreon page? Could you have been rethinking Patreon? Could you, if your Patreon is working for you, could you have been funneling more content into that Patreon? Same thing for Kickstarter. They've got it seems to be a thing right now to do kind of micro Kickstarters for small things. You just run the Kickstarter for a few days instead of a standard 30-day goal. What about a micro Kickstarter? And by the way, don't worry about failing because that is good information in and of itself. That's market response. That's free market research. A failed Kickstarter. There's nothing to be upset about with a failed Kickstarter. Unless you don't take the time to analyze why it failed. Then there's something that you're missing there. But what else could you have been doing during that time? And could that reasonably, plausibly have made more money than this comic convention? Prove it to yourself. We always hear, and in fact, this was a topic at the Greater Philadelphia Expo. Well, small shows are better. Small shows are better. I got news for you. I think you're fooling yourself if you think small shows are better, and I'll tell you why. When you go to San Diego and there's 10,000 people, more than 10,000, but let's keep the numbers simple. There's 10,000 people at San Diego Comic Convention, and if you only sell 5 books, you think, oh my God, this was a horrible experience, and you're right. And then you go to a small convention and there's only, let's say, 100 people at that convention, and you sell 5 books. You feel much better about it because you sold to a greater percentage of the population that was there. However, you still only sold 5 books. You still spent all of that time to only sell 5 books. So I think people fool themselves into thinking that smaller shows are better because they feel as if they're catching a greater percentage of the attendees that are there. I think it still comes down to dollars and cents. I think it still comes down to how many books did you sell, how much did you sell, how many commissions did you do, what was your cost, what was your revenue, and then subtracting one from the other, what is your true profit? And I mean, be honest with yourself. The reason I keep saying be honest with yourself is because I know how I did convention math for years and years and years. I spent a good amount of time fooling myself, just like you're fooling yourself. You can't kid a kidder. And that's why I keep saying that. By all means, do the honest math, and then you can tell yourself, is a small show worth it? Can you keep doing this until you need glasses, in other words? Maybe you can. Maybe you can keep doing it until you need glasses. Having said that, I'm going to comment number 2 and topic number 2, and that means I need my glasses again. Okay, question. If Patreon is a subscription service like you have said, then what are your thoughts on lapsing and returning patrons? Well, I'm glad you asked that. That's a great question. And the answer is I love lapsing and returning patrons. I love any patron, anybody that comes for almost any amount of time And that's going to open up, I think, 2 or 3 subjects. So bear with me. I love all patrons. Okay. Now, of course, the patrons I don't like are the ones that show up, take content, and leave without processing the first pledge. That's not so good, right? And those are the patrons that you immediately block. But don't get block happy. Don't make the mistake I made in the first couple months of my patron. A lapsed or a patron that leaves is a patron that can come back at some point. So let's talk about all the permutations of that. Number 1, you've got the declined payment patron, right? They were there. They put their credit card in. Maybe they paid 1 month and the pledge was successfully processed. But then the next month, their card was declined. And by the way, this happens all the time. It's not unusual. I can easily, from my own personal experience, sometimes that number of declines goes up to $300, $400 for a month for me. Okay, so immediately I started being vindictive, being the little Caesar that I am, started thumbs downing on the block button on all these patrons. Or I would just delete them, right? You can delete a patron without blocking them. And that's what I would do until somebody at Patreon explained to me that here's how it works. When a patron is in a declined payment situation, that person can no longer see your protected content. But they can still sign in. They still, from their standpoint, everything is normal until they try to access the content. And then they get told, hey, your payment was declined, so you can't see this content that you thought you were coming to see today. Would you like to take care of that right now? If they say yes and take care of it, boom, you get the payment that moment. It just funnels right into your Patreon account, and they, as soon as the charge is made successfully, get to see your content. You want that to happen. In a declined payment situation, you want the person at some point to come back, be surprised that they can't see your content, and that means you got to keep putting out good content to keep bringing them back in. But they come back, they're surprised. I didn't see my content. I wanted to see my content. How come? Oh, and this happens all the time. It's a situation where the expiration date on their card went up. It's happened to you, I'm sure. It happens to me all the time. Or a card they got stolen or lost, and they had to change a card. They just go in, update the information, bing, you get the payment, and they get the content, and everybody is happy. If you would have deleted them, like I was doing for a few months there, you never get a chance to have that happen. They go in to sign in, they're not your patron, they can't figure out what happened, and they walk away in disgust. All right? So, number 1, don't delete a declined pledge. Now, somebody that comes in and they're a patron and they successfully make their pledge and then they leave. Fine. I was happy I had them for a month. That's something you have to understand about Patreon as well. This is not a long-term commitment. You people who are doing, if you're, at the end of the year, you get this and that. This is a monthly, month-by-month commitment, if that. They pay for a month, they get a month of commitment. If you earn their patronage past that, they'll stay on for another month, and they'll get another month of content. And this, you can't expect more than a month. All right. They're not planning to stay more than a month. Look at your Patreon exit surveys. They're not saying every time they say it. That's, I guarantee it's what you see the most in your Patreon exit survey. I only intended to pledge for a limited time. This is not a long-term commitment for these people. They might just be sampling you. They just might be, let's see what's back here. And they come, as long as that payment was made successfully, there's no harm, no foul. Why? Because you're going to keep putting out good content. You're going to keep hitting social media, talking about it. You're going to be excited about it. Hopefully some other people are going to be tweeting about it and Facebooking about it as well. And that person that sampled you and already has their Patreon account set up anyway, that's the key. they're going to come back. You know how many of my patrons leave and come back and leave and come back? It might be that they just feel that $10 a month for the content that I'm giving is too much. And maybe they, in a weird way, they think, well, $5 would be better. So what they do is they pledge in February, they're gone in March. They're back in April, they're gone in May. And at the end of the year, basically they paid $5 a month. Because you can catch up on all the stuff that you missed, right? You can go back all the way to the beginning. That's fine. But stop and think about it. How happy are you to get $5 a month out of those people? Even $1 a month is way more than you were getting per person when you were running ads. So laugh all the way to the bank. It is not a problem. Recurring pledges, people that come and go, not a problem. The problem is when they make a pledge, they don't get charged. They make a pledge and then they leave before their card can get charged. And I know you're getting ahead of me. You say, oh no, you can fix that. I'm going to get to that in a minute. So the real problem is somebody that pledges and then leaves before the end of the month when their card gets processed. That is the patron that you block. Okay? And you can put a reason in there, and you just click the button that says patron took content and did not pay. That's a person you don't need back. That's fair. You don't have to do it with malice. This is just good site maintenance on your point. If somebody leaves before the end of the month and they don't let their payment go through, you block that person. Very simple. Not a big deal. Now, you guys got ahead of me because you said, oh no, you can set it in such a way that as soon as they make that pledge, then they get charged in that moment. And I am going to tell you that that is not the dumbest thing you could do, but I don't like it. And I'll tell you why. All right, I won't make a value decision on you here, but I don't like it, and I'll tell you why. Because I count on it. Here, let's start at the beginning. At the end of the month, I've got a lot of patrons that have been there throughout the entire month or maybe several months, and it's getting down to the 29th of the month and the 30th of the month and the 31st of the month. Those last 2 or 3 days of the month, I see a big drop in my patrons, right? The ones who have been there, and for whatever reason, and again, as long as one of those payments previous has been made, I've got no beef with them, but I start dropping them right at the end of the month. This is when you'll see me on my site and on social media around those last few days of the month. This is when I start banging the drum real hard about all the things that you're going to get at the first of the month if you become a new patron. And I've got a very good track record of replacing those outgoing patrons with incoming patrons. And it's going to all link up in a minute. Settle down. So I start banging the drum at the end of the month that what I do at the first week of every month for my patrons, new and old, I put together these reward packages. I make it possible so that you can see all of these comics in Dropbox because the Patreon user experience it has improved vastly, but it's not great for comics. It's setting them up with Dropbox links, setting them up with that is so easy, and they can read the comics that way, and it's fine. You can set an expiration date on those Dropbox links, and bingo, you've got problem solved. So I start banging the drum on the monthly reward packages at the end of every month, and I can very, very well, I'm going to jinx myself. I'll have a crash this month. But usually, I can replace all those outgoing patrons with incoming patrons. Now, here's the problem with the setting that makes the patron pay the moment that they click the button. No one is going to join your Patreon at the end of the month. Why? Because they're going to feel as if they're paying for the full month price and only getting a little part of that month. They're going to stay away from that. That's my fear, is that they are going to say, wait a minute, it's the 25th of the month. I'm not going to pay because I'm going to be paying full price for only 5 more days or 6 more days, depending on the month, right? So I don't want to screw around with a good thing. And right now I've got a good thing going. At the end of the month, I see a bunch of patrons leaving. That's fair. As long as their payment was processed earlier, I've got no beef for them. All right? But I want to be able to bring in new ones to replace them. And I don't want them even having a second guessing. I don't want them to say to themselves, wait a minute, why am I joining at the end of the month when I could just wait until the beginning of the month and then I'll pay and then I'll have the full month. I'll pay full price for the full month. All right? Because what's going to happen is, let's face it, I'm not the top concern on all of these people's lives. They've actually got lives outside of me, and they're going to forget. And then they're going to remember on the 15th of the next month, they're going to say, wait a minute, half the month has gone by. No. That's why I don't use that setting. I want that. I will take, and you know what? I've been screwed over by this maybe a handful of times. I've been doing this going back to like 2014. Maybe a dozen people I've had to block because they came, took the content, and then left before their pledge was processed. Maybe a dozen times since 2014. Okay? Most people they're patrons. They're here because they like you anyway. I don't have that much of a problem with people not following through on their pledge. I've gotten burned very rarely. So I'm keeping it, for me, I'm keeping it at that pledge is processed on the last day of the month. That's fine because it works for me. I don't want those people second guessing in the last half of the month if they're asking themselves, am I paying full price for a small part of the month? And I've gotten burned, thankfully, knock on wood, I've gotten burned very rarely by people who do the pledge and don't follow through. So that's what I think about recurring patrons. I love them. I love them. The only thing I don't like is when you come and don't let your payment process. And I've got, to use a popular term this month, I've got the nuclear option for this. I just block them so they can't do it to me again. You can't do more or less than that. You know, that's all you can do. And you know, you get that little moment of vindication when you hit that block button and this guy did not take, he did not pay for the content he take, and then you get it out of your system and you move on. You find other things to be obsessed about if you're like me. So that's what I think about Patreon backers. They can come and go all they want. I'm always happy to see them come back. Sad to see them leave, but happy to see them come back. And I'm telling you from personal experience, if you're putting out content, if you're feeding that Patreon like you should be, and I'm telling you right now, you guys, your Patreon is your business now. It's not your website. Your website is a loss leader to funnel people into your Patreon. Get your head rearranged. It's not 2005 anymore. It's 21/7. And you've got to think about this in those terms. That's the business. So, feed that Patreon. Put content, exclusive content into your Patreon. And once people get a taste of it, even if they leave, they're going to come back. Why? They're going to wonder what happened, what did they miss? And if you're doing a good job on social media, remember the 3 C's. If you're doing a good job on social media, they're going to get suckered right, but not suckered right back. Don't tell people I said suckered. They're going to be sucked, is what I meant. Sucked right back in by the gravitational pull of your great work. Nobody's suckering anybody. We're sucking people in with our gravity. That's what I think about patrons. You can come and go all you want, because I know if my content is good, I'm going to get you back sooner or later. This is Webcomics Confidential. My name is Brad Guigar. Hit the comments over at webcomics.com. Tell me what you think. Hey, did I make a point? Am I full of shit? You make the call. I'll see you guys next time.